What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for the People's Open. Gonna go through all things at the WM Phoenix. We'll go over any questions you have down there in chat. That'll include a look at some of the weather, a look at some of the other things going on, as well as ownership heading into lock. There's some loud-ass sound outside going on, so hopefully we're good over there at our house. I think it's just my cats screwing around with some shit. But yeah, I'm going to get you guys ready for all the action. We got Jay Steele down there. He says, Papa needs a new pair of shoes. What kind of shoes are you shopping for? Hopefully some golf shoes. What's going on, David? What are my thoughts on Midwoo? We'll talk about some of that a little bit later on. What's going on, Timothy? And like I said, we got to figure out what kind of shoes he's trying to buy. You're talking like Nikes, talking Jordans, that sort of thing. Go ahead and let us know down there. But yeah, any questions you guys have, feel free to go ahead and throw those down in chat. But we're going to talk through some of the first off things I noticed about the course this week. And then afterwards, we'll go through a few things on the weather side as well. So in terms of the golf course, you can see some of the stat averages on here. It's worth noting that last year, it was a little bit more receptive than most. So if you take a look at these averages from last year, your fairway average goes up compared to the last 3-year average. And same thing with the green regulation. It goes from like 68% up to about 71%. All the reports that I've heard from the course this week confirm what we talked about on Monday, that we have a slightly firmer golf course. And when we add in 2023 and 2022 over here, you're going to see that the averages go down significantly. You can see the fairway average drops about 3-4%, and the green average also drops about 3-4%. So I think that's going to be more in line with what we have for this year. So last year, when you had guys like Sam Burns, Hoffman, Nick Taylor winning, it was a little bit of an easier golf course, I would say, than what we're used to seeing. The golf course that is going to be here in 2025 is the firm and fast golf course that you saw in 2023. So, Scotty won that year. You still had Nick Taylor in second, so it wasn't all that much different, but you see some more grinders towards the top end of the board. And historically, you see a lot of grinders playing well here. If we go back to 2022, when Brooks was still on the PGA Tour, he finished in third, and he's known as a major championship grinder. The top 4 of this leaderboard was Xander, Koepka, Cantlay, and Scheffler. You usually get a lot of your world's best players that show up at this course when you have these firm and fast conditions. It makes it a much more well-rounded test. And you can see last year, like around the green, you had some guys that lost up there towards the top end of the board. I'm not sure it's going to be that way this time around. When you have the firm conditions, extra missed greens out there, you're going to have to be at least decent around the green to go out there and hold it together. Now, I'm not talking about like you have to go out there and gain like a half a stroke to a stroke per round, but you're going to see some of these guys that were just a little bit into the red last year be a lot more significantly red, right? If you're missing 4 or 5 greens as opposed to just 1 or 2, these guys that only lost like a quarter to a half a stroke over there around the green could look a whole lot worse over the 4-round sample size. So that's what I'll say about last year's conditions. From what we heard from some of the players there at the golf course is that it looks a little bit crunchier than what you had in 2024. The one thing worth noting with the scoring averages is that round 1 last year was the hardest out of the bunch. And that was also when they had those wins in that rain kick up. So I don't think it's a surprise that the first day played a little bit harder because of those wins that kicked up. But wins aren't going to be an issue out there for Thursday and Friday. So to show you guys the forecast over the next few days, this is the HRRR forecast for Thursday. Outside of a puff of wind that comes around like 2 to 4 p.m., not much over there on Thursday. And just to give you guys the full breakdown of all the different models, there's hardly any wind over here on Thursday. So pretty much every model is calling for sub 6 miles an hour. Like I said, a little bit of a puff of wind over there on the HRRR. I guess you could say the same thing about the icon. When we go over here to Friday, it also looks relatively flat. The one thing I'll say is that on Friday, it looks flat across every single model. So you could see on here, right, not one of them is calling for over 5-6 miles an hour wind. Whereas you do have 2 out of the 6 models out here for Thursday that are calling for a little bit more wind in the afternoon. So if that ends up being the case, maybe you do want to go AM, PM to try and avoid the winds kicking up a little bit tomorrow. But even if we take a look at this HRRR model, it's only about a 2-hour window where the winds kick up from like 4 to 8 miles an hour. And though the wind gusts do get to like 13, 14 miles an hour, this doesn't look all that definitive, right? You see like just a little spike when it comes to these projections. A lot of times that's really hard to predict, right? What we'd rather see is a constant, sort of wind direction, constant wind speed for like 5-6 hours. So we can feel good about what we're actually going to see tomorrow. But when it's this sporadic, when it has this much variance to it, like you see from hour to hour, I just don't know how reliable that's going to be. So of course, this is on a Wednesday evening. We still have a lock tomorrow morning to go out there and adjust to this. If you're watching this over there on Thursday morning, you should be checking this forecast out there before lock. If you're on windy.com, I'd say if you're playing PGA DFS, you should definitely be investing in one of these memberships. Windy's only like $15 a year. And again, I don't get no money from them. I'm not sponsored over there by Windy, but having this data, having the ability to go out there and look at it tomorrow morning is going to be absolutely massive. And, if we wake up tomorrow and it looks like the wind is a little bit more pronounced, let's say that the HRRR tomorrow is calling for more significant winds there in the PM hours, then maybe I do lean into some AM PM wave players. But as of right now, it's not really a big part of my process. I would say, maybe in your large field 150 max, maybe you could take 5 to 10% of your lineups and stack them in either direction. The side I'd prefer would be the AM PM wave just because of that wind tomorrow afternoon. But then that means you'd have to fade Scotty, who has the PMT time. So, that just kind of throws everything into the blender. Maybe you run Scotty lineups and then you just use, only guys over there from the AM PM wave. There are a couple different variations that you could go with the weather. But just to kind of reiterate and go back to it, it doesn't look like there's anything definitive right now over the first few days. So not really a part of my process. I'm going out there and incorporating, but maybe it will be tomorrow morning where I'm going to wake up. I'm going to do my due diligence before lock, especially as it's 2 hours behind. You have no excuse with like a 9-10 a.m. lock to not wake up and check it. Most likely things aren't going to change. Most likely it is just going to be some sporadic wind that comes through tomorrow. But if that were to change, it could be an edge to go out there and leverage. Worth noting that a lot of the field isn't going to adjust their lineups tomorrow. So let's say there ends up being some big weather edge that comes out of nowhere. I don't think a lot of people are going to have exposure to that. So, sometimes the weather edge will end up giving some steam to one side versus the other. Sometimes it'll be a 2-3% ownership difference on a lot of players. It's going to be zero difference over there tomorrow morning. So I guess that's the one saving grace that we have with the weather there. Let me see if there's any specific weather questions, and then we're going to go into the DFS side. FootJoy Quantum size 12. So yeah, some golf shoes. I love it. Played some golf myself today down there in Miami. It was a whole lot of fun, but I didn't play particularly well. So maybe I need some new shoes myself. Looking at thoughts on Rogers, Fox, and Smalley. So yeah, let's go over to the DFS side. So let me bring up my projection sheet. In terms of like thoughts on players, I can give you my quick thoughts, but I'm not 100% sure what that means, right? Like I always get questions like, what are my thoughts on guys? Let me know if it's like for DFS, for betting, that sort of thing. That would kind of clarify that a little bit, Timothy. And then they're starting early and will be cool the first few hours. Yeah, that's worth noting. The temperatures for the first 2 hours of play will be at like 51, 57 degrees, but it's only going to be for like the first hour and a half of tee time. So I wouldn't, maybe if you're playing Showdown, it's a bigger factor to go out there and incorporate that. But for main slate, you'd be thinking a little bit too much. At least in my opinion, it doesn't look to be a whole lot of an edge there. And yeah, you're saying for main slate, even for main slates, that's even more so the case, right? Like, how are you going to lean into that? If there's not a massive edge, you're talking like 0.1 shots there, right? With it being a cooler for like 2-3 holes, you're way overthinking things if you're looking at it that much. And the only reason I say that, right, I used to do that sort of thing, right? I tried to find any edge I possibly can. 3-4 holes played in a little bit of cool weather. Yeah, it's like 0.1 shot at the very most. You're not going to see that much of a difference there. And you're talking main slate for the players. Okay. Thoughts on Ryder and Putnam in DFS. So you're trying to squeeze in Scotty. Ryder, I think, is a decent play down low. I think there's a lot of guys in the 6K range that are plays, Dave. So we're going to go through a few here on the live stream that I like personally. But what I'll say about it is that it's the kind of slate where, because there's no 5K range, the 6K range players, especially like top end of the 6K range, they're normally like 7K range guys. Like there are guys, Matt McCarty is probably the best example. He's one of my value plays, as a lot of you probably know this week. He's the kind of guy that'd normally be $7,500, $7,600. So Scotty Scheffler this week, I've actually increased my projection on his ownership throughout the week, as it seems really easy to fit him in. There are enough guys down there in the 6K range that you can use that he's just going to be royally owned. So yeah, I think a lot of people are thinking the same way out there. Like, how can I fit in Scotty Scheffler? Ryder's the kind of guy I've been considering for it. I like a few other guys down there a little bit more, but what I'm looking for in plays down in the 6K range is either really good approach play or really good putting on this overseeded surface. Sam Ryder is really good on both. He's been a good iron player lately, I believe, gaining like 0.7 shots gained approach per round. And he's also been really good on this overseeded surface. So, and yeah, you meant for the players. Okay. So you're looking at Rogers, Fox, and Smalley. So I'm assuming for a DFS lineup, Patrick Rogers, I'm assuming you mean there with Rogers. And he's an okay. I mean, he's just kind of a guy to me. Patrick Rogers is usually pretty good on the West Coast. I mean, I'll just be transparent and say I have no interest in him this week, so I'm not using him. Ryan Fox is a bomber. He's a high birdie percentage player. I have a lot more interest in a Ryan Fox in a week like this. Main reason being is that he's not going to be popular. Like Patrick Rogers, people just play him on the West Coast. People love playing Patrick Rogers for whatever reason. I just don't get it. The guy's an absolute slapdick. No idea why he's one of the more popular players with fans out there on tour. Yeah, that's why he doesn't really move the needle for me, right? If he's going to get all that ownership, people love playing him for some reason. I'd have to really like the guy to want to get there myself. So I'd say that I like Fox the most, and I don't like Smalley this week because he's super chalky. At least compared to where we normally get an Alex Smalley, he's normally 1 to maybe 2% owned at the very most. I've got him well over that mark this week, and it's all because of the form. He has been playing better golf recently, but I remember all of 2024. And if you guys take a look at Alex Smalley in 2024, for lack of a better word, he was utter horseshit the last year. He missed, I think it was like 10 missed cuts in a row. Was at a point where he had like 3 made cuts and like 25 missed cuts last year. That's a tough scene for me. I won't play that kind of guy's chalk. I don't care how good he's played the last 2-3 weeks. If you're giving me a guy's chalk that was literal dog shit last year, no thank you, right? I'm going to take a wait and see approach. Maybe he does have a better 2025. He's definitely on the right track with how he started so far, but I've got to see it a little bit more if I'm going to be frank with you. Already went over the Ryder one, but yeah, Putnam, I did want to give you my thoughts on that, Dave. He's not my favorite course fit. I mean, this isn't a birdie fest. I'm not going to say that, but you usually want ball strikers around here. Not like Putnam's a terrible ball striker, but he's not an elite ball striker by any means. He's the kind of guy, Putnam, that I play at weak field events, and that's not what we have this week, right? You have a lot of top level players that are playing here at the WM. If you're talking a fall swing event, you're even talking like a John Deere Classic, that sort of thing. Give me some Andrew Putnam at low ownership. If you're in a large field like 150 max, I guess I could see getting to that sort of play. But, he's not the kind of guy I play in these events. Like in these events down low, I want guys that have that top 5, top 10 equity. And it's not to say that he can't get there. He absolutely could. He's done it plenty of times out there in the PGA Tour to this point. It's not my favorite. What course did I play in Miami? I played Miami Beach Golf Club. So it's a public course down there. Went down there to visit my brother who lives down there. So it was a little bit closer for him. How do I feel about a nap outright? And you can get plus 150, plus 1,500, I should say, 150 to 1. So the question's about outrights, right? If I liked to nap outright, I would have bet them this week. So I guess that answers your question, right? Like I can't say that I love the outright because I haven't gone there myself. I will give you some thoughts, I guess, on the course fit. He hits the ball high. He had a good West Coast swing last year. So you could argue that he likes this type of grass. He likes this part of the country. Whatever the case may be, he has had success in this part of the world. That's where all the positive ends. Because before the last few weeks, he's been underdog shit. I mean, towards the middle to the end of 2024, he fell off a roof. I mean, the guy was nowhere near what he was before. So in terms of an outright, that's not the kind of guy I'm normally looking to play, especially because he just had a couple good starts, and you're buying at the highest point, it feels like, because, I mean, he was like 250 to 1 in these sort of events prior to the last few weeks. So, yeah, it's probably not my favorite, if you can tell. How do I feel about fading Scotty in DFS? Well, you can see he's a core play for me, so I don't think it's the brightest idea, but I'm not going to tell you how to build your lineups. If you want to go out there and fade a 40% owned player, then by all means, go out there and do so. Like, there's a time and place for doing that. But what I will remind you about fading a Scotty Scheffler is just because you're fading a 40, 50% owned player, you still have 40, 50% of lineups that are doing the exact same thing as you. So I don't think this is the kind of week to get all bent out of shape about Scotty Scheffler. Like, just pick what you're going to do with it and move on, because it's not the end of the world. You still have 5 other spots where you have to play against half the field. Even if you play them, you still have 5 other spots where you've got to beat half of the field, right, that already have Scotty Scheffler. The one thing I'll say about these guys that get like super mega chalky is there's usually a reason for it. Like John Rahm, when he played the Mexico Open, was like 60% owned. Scotty Scheffler, an event he's won 2 of the last 3 years. I usually play these kind of guys. So you can tell I'm playing him. He's a core play for me. It's an option to go out there and fade him. It's not one that I think's wise, though. Hence why I'm playing him, right? Do I like Siwoo or Poston more at 8K? I like neither option, if I'm being frank. So Noah, I can't pick between those two, but I don't like either one. Jason says, if I could pick a 4-man Survivor Series team and you're one of the 4, what PGA players would I want on my team? That's a good question. So Jason, question, any PGA Tour players or only this week? Because if it's any PGA Tour players, there's a bunch that I'm going to add to the mix. But if you're asking me for just this week, I can give you my top 4 too. How did I swing them today? Absolutely terrible, Brant. I was hitting my drive as well, at least. I was setting up a lot of really good birdie looks. My iron game, though, I think I hit like 5 greens regulation. Truly abysmal performance when it came to hitting the ball. So I can't say it was my best day swinging the clubs, but we had a lot of fun, that's for sure. If there's no wind tomorrow, would I say it doesn't matter whether you use AM or PM guys? Yeah, you're saying sometimes the AM guys will struggle the first few holes. So if I was playing Showdown, which I'm not playing Showdown, I haven't really given it a whole lot of thought, I'd either go late AM guys. I think late AM guys is what I would do because I don't ever play a whole bunch for round 1 Showdown. But if I played a round 1 Showdown lineup, I might do it just because I thought of this. You know, a single entry, maybe a higher dollar contest where I only go after guys that are towards like the last 4 or 5 groups of that AM wave. That feels, and again, we don't have the data on it, so it's just my intuition right now, right? It's me making my best guess right here would be that those guys have the best conditions because it's going to be warm by the time that they're teeing off, or at least getting close to its maximum temperature, and there's no wind. We know there's no wind in the morning. And in the early afternoon, late afternoon, it does look like it's going to kick up a little bit. So those guys that have the warmer golf course would probably be your ideal players. Who do I like with long odds? So we'll go through a few Jay Steele. I don't know if you saw my betting preview. I have a few over 100 to 1. Wyndham Clark breakout tournament this week. We'll talk about it. You can see him there, right, Tim? Maybe he's just cut off. We're going to talk about Wyndham Clark. I agree with you. Let's put it that way. Let's go with PGA Tour players. Okay, so if I'm picking top 4 players to build around, and the Survivor thing in golf, I guess I don't really get. I guess maybe you mean like making the cut. So Scotty Scheffler has to be one of those. There's no doubt about it, right? He's one of the top 4 players on the PGA Tour. Number 2 is where it gets interesting because I don't want Rory. Rory's too inconsistent for me. I know he's looked good so far, but no thank you. Aubert would be in contention. I think Xander has to be on that list as well. The reason why I like Xander, or the reason why he makes a lot of sense, at least last year, is very consistent. The issue is he's dealing with the injury. So I'd say Scotty, Aubert, Morikawa, also a very consistent player. Especially if it's like a survivor for making cuts, that's kind of what you want. And then Corey Connors. If it is a cut-making survivor, Corey Connors is like absolute gold when it comes to that. So great question. And those would be my top 4. If it's just talking like top 4 best players, it's probably Scotty, Aubert, Xander, and Rory, I guess. And I know that's a very like cop-out answer, but it's true, right? They are the 4 best. Nice to be out there nonetheless, of course. Thoughts on Nick Dunlap as a GPP play? Well, you guys are asking all the right questions, I think, because we're going to talk about Nick Dunlap here in just a minute. So just stay tuned and we'll talk about that. And you're going 35% Siwoo. Hey, that could be a play this week. Best of luck with you there, Phil. Let's talk through a few plays, though. So towards the top end of the board, you guys can see the ownership here. It's pretty spread out other than guys like Scotty. So I still like Scotty, still like guys like Hideki. I'm trying to get a little bit different towards the top end of the board. But what we're going to talk through now are a few pivot plays that I like. And maybe Sahith, I wouldn't call him like a true pivot play at 13.5%. But with his course history, I thought he was going to be 20% owned. He's $9,500 compared to the other guys in the 9K range. I thought he'd be by far the most popular. And you can see here that Tom Kim's 15% owned. Sepp Straka with the form, I knew that he'd get some attention, but he's just about the same ownership as a Sahith. So I think a lot of people, when they see these ownership numbers, like a Tom Kim is still going to get played. People love playing him when he's in form, but I think people would rather play a Sepp Straka Straka than a Sahith Theegala, which makes me think that there's a chance that Sahith Theegala moonwalks in terms of his ownership, comes back down to earth a little bit. And I know I'll have him here at 13.5%. But if he were to be closer to that 10% mark in some of those contests, then he would be a really good leverage spot here in that 9K range. I think Corey Connors is going to be overlooked. If you're really looking for a low-owned player, he's the one that you want to jam in. But in terms of plays that look good in terms of projection, that model well at this kind of course, that have also shown the course history, Sahith Theegala is, kind of the holy trifecta right there. He gives us everything we're looking for, and I think that there's a chance that he gets squeezed when it comes to the ownership. So I'll shut up about him before I steam him up too much here with this content. But that's kind of the idea there at $9,500. Let's talk about one true pivot, though. So towards the top, ownership's kind of spread out. Like you have your Corey Connors there at single digit, but down here, the 8K range is where ownership gets a little bit more polarized. And Nick Taylor, for example, is over 14% owned. A Matt McNeely, Kurt Kitayama are over 10% owned. Then you've got Wyndham Clark, who, by the way, I know he's from Colorado. Everyone made a whole big deal about that last year when we talked about Castle Rock and the BMW Championship. But do you know where Wyndham Clark plays out of? And if you don't, I'll give you a hint. It's TPC Scottsdale. He's from Scottsdale. He's good buddies with Tony Finau, who also plays out of Scottsdale. And he's only 7.3% owned. We're talking about a guy who wins big-time events, a guy who at the Ryder Cup shows us a whole lot of emotion. These kind of players, like a Justin Thomas, a Wyndham Clark, that have no problems rising to that occasion at the Ryder Cup, usually have a good time with this kind of event. And I can tell you that Wyndham Clark, he kind of rubs me as the guy who embraces the kind of fan atmosphere and isn't going to be like Zach Johnson complaining like an absolute little bitch. So here at 7.3% owned, people just want to overlook him because of the form. Like, okay, I'll let everyone else make that mistake. And sure, he might go out there and fall flat on his face. Even if he does, I'm taking him in like 20% of my lineups, and I think that's a well-worthy investment. If you're going to get 3x leverage with 20% of the field on a guy that's a major champion, that has won other signature events like the Wells Fargo Championship, he could definitely win an event like the Waste Management. And even if he doesn't win, he's only $8,500. A top 10 is really what we're looking for in terms of an optimal play. Top 5 and book it, right? You're going to have them there at $8,500. So this is a GPP play if I've ever seen one, but just because you're taking a Scotty Scheffler at some ownership doesn't mean that you have to be chalky across the board. Just as I said before, even if you fade him, right, you're still playing against half the field. If you play Scotty Scheffler, right, you're playing against half the field either way. So it's the kind of week where if you really like Scotty, go out there and play him because you're going to have spots to get different. Now, if you go Scotty and then your second man in is Tom Kim and then your third man in is somebody here like a Nick Taylor, then like maybe you have problems, right? Because it's 14% ownership, 15% there with the Tom Kim, and then nearly 50% with the Scotty Scheffler. But if your start's a Scotty, a Sahith, and then a Wyndham Clark here at $7,300, you don't really have to worry about it all that much. You're doing a lot of the work in terms of your differentiation with your 8 and 9K players. And you add on top of that some 6 and 7K guys that are at relatively low ownership numbers, and then you're totally fine when it comes to the ownership this week. So I wanted to point out some pivot plays here across the board. You guys can obviously see the ownership here from 8K plus. For all the ownership that I have this week, make sure to check out my Patreon page for that, because when we get below the 8K range, you're not going to see the ownership there on the board. I know we had a question about outrights, by the way. I did bet Hideki, as you guys can see there. I also took Luke Clanton and Min Woo Lee at 66-1. But now let's go through some true pivots towards the bottom. So Denny McCarthy, who, by the way, if you watch the Showdown streams, he just never got there for us. I mean, last week, every single round, Denny McCarthy hitting his irons well, cannot buy a putt for his life. So you know what I'm doing this week? I'm playing Denny McCarthy because he has been hitting the ball beautifully the last few times that we've seen him, and he just can't buy a putt for his life. And you can see on this POA overseed that he gains nearly 3/4 of a stroke per round putting. So you get a little bit of putting regression there with Denny McCarthy, and it could be a big week for him. But most importantly, just as I was just mentioning with Wyndham Clark, this is the spot of the board to try and get a little bit different. You have some players down here in the 7K range that are really getting some steam, namely guys like a Billy Horschel, even Ricky Fowler is getting some more ownership than you would probably expect. guys like a JJ Spawn in that like 10 to 12% range. So players like a McCarthy, and even guys that are like 5-6% owned can really get you different to the field at this portion of the board. Still got Chucky Hoffman there at 8.9%, maybe a little bit more popular than what I would hope for. But guys like Nick Dunlop are players that you can use for some leverage. I know we had the question about him before, but a high upside player, high ball flight player, which will help with the firm greens this week. And we don't have a sample size on these PO overseeded greens. He only played in one event last year that had them, but it was at the Cognizant, and he had a really good putting week there at the Cognizant Classic. So 4.2% owned. He's another guy that you can use for some leverage. And there's not a bunch of chalk towards the bottom end of the range here, but like I would rather have a Nick Dunlop than an Alex Smalley, and Smalley's higher owned than what you have there with Dunlop. I got an Echeverria here at 3.2%, so another 6K range guy that I'm getting to. And this is an example of one of those 6K range players that I was talking about before. That's a legit guy in the 6K range, and he's super low owned. So 3% ownership, super low price tag on an Echeverria, a guy who won during the fall swing. It's just a no-brainer play, in my opinion. You've got guys like Rico Hoey here at 2.3%. He's a no-brainer play. He played super well on the West Coast swing last year. He's a long player. He's got the apex height that we're looking for in these firmer greens. And I know the form hasn't been great lately. He's had maybe a little bit of a downturn compared to what he's used to, but I'll remember that he was super chalky during the fall swing. He was one of the most popular players for a reason because of how well he was playing. I'm willing to overlook that kind of form when Hoey's only $6,700, right? I mean, if he was 8K and he was 10 to 15% owned, then you probably don't play Hoey with that kind of form. But he's a completely different guy to consider when he's super cheap, essentially min price. I mean, he's $700 over the minimum, and no one's using him at 2.3%. McCarty, by the way, if you guys didn't see my post on Twitter, he's from Scottsdale. He lives at TPC Scottsdale, so he plays this golf course all the time now. And from his interview today, he was able to confirm that over there at the interview schedule. And he said that he's played this golf course a few thousand times. So I already liked McCarty to win at 275 to 1. I already liked them at 1.5% ownership. Now you tell me that he has all that kind of experience around this track, and I'll definitely be a long-term buyer. But the last guy we'll go through here is $6,400 Joel Damon, who during my preview there on Monday, I mentioned might be super chalky this week because of the form. He's number 20 in recent form ranking. Sorry, number 11 actually in recent form ranking. Number 20 in terms of total model ranking. And I thought he might be like 10% owned. The reason I say that is you got to find ways to play Scotty Scheffler. And at $6,400, a guy in form, you thought everyone was going to be flocking to him. And I think in single entries, he might actually be 10% plus owned. So like your big, $200 big 555 single entries, I think Joel Damon's going to get a little bit more steam from some of those sharper players. But in large field GPPs, if he's going to be sub 5%, I'll play some 10, 12% of Joel Damon in lineups and get that leverage to the rest of the field. So there are a bunch of guys down here that I'm willing to play. I'll give you guys a little bonus play here as well. Paul Waring at $6,400. If you guys don't know who he is, that is totally fine and understandable because he's from the DP World Tour. He was a standout last year, a winner over there on the DP World Tour. I believe it was one of their bigger Rolex Series events too. And he went out there and won. And he was also a top 10 machine. He maybe wasn't the most consistent putter that you had on that side of the pond, but a really good ball striker. So, Waring, the kind of guy that I've been waiting to come over to the PGA Tour for quite some time. The kind of guy that has a high birdie percentage, a very aggressive player when it comes to the iron play. If you're looking for pure pivots down low, Damon at 4%, he opens up a lot of flexibility. But if you're looking to really get different with the ownership, that's where guys like Waring come in. That's where guys like a Hayden Springer come in as well. I guess I'll add another little bonus play down here towards the bottom. Hayden Springer, one of the top bet the number plays this week over there on their model, and he's got a high apex height when it comes to his ball flight. So $6,400, those are the kind of guys I'm looking for towards the bottom. And like you see with every other additional play that I've pointed out on here, of course, there are a lot more than I'm playing, like you guys can see on the player pool on Patreon, but they're all super low end guys to offset that Scotty Scheffler chalk. Just because you're using one chalky player does not write the story for your entire lineup. You have other spots to go out there and get that differentiation done, which I think is the important thing to remember. And even if you're fading Scotty, this is the other thing, okay, guys? If you think you're being, a genius this week in fading Scotty Scheffler, first off, best of luck to you if that's your strategy. But if you do, you still have to get different, right? Just because you're getting off of Scotty Scheffler and using one of these other guys up top does not give you all the leverage that you need. You can't go like, oh, I'm going to play Hideki instead, right? And fade Scotty and then play chalk at the other 5 spots, because guess what, Donkey? You're still going to duplicate yourself and you're still going to have no leverage in the large field GPP. So I think that's why I've kind of convinced myself into just like not worrying about the ownership, is because even if you take one of these pivots that's like 15 to 20% owned, you can't be taking the chalk down there in the 7 to 8K range anyways. So why not take the guy who's clearly the best player in this field? So that's the idea over there with the lineup construction, ownership on a week like this. I think especially when you get to the 8K range and below, it's a spot to go out there and fade a whole lot of chalk, particularly if you're somebody like myself that plans on eating that chalk with Scotty Scheffler. So you're not hearing anything about Eric Cole, because I don't think he's playing this week. I think that's why you're not hearing anything about him. So you are actually. He's playing in the field. I think even I didn't think he was playing this week. Holy shit. Look at that. No, you're spot on. I didn't even know he was playing this week, and he is playing well. However, this is the big however, right? His last event out was really, really bad. So this is why a lot of people aren't talking up Eric Cole, is this shots gained profile just went to complete shit. Last 24 rounds, we'll look at that, because you're right. He was playing really well outside of like the last 2 events that he's had out here on tour, but it really fell off, as you saw there. Before that, he's gaining in 3 of the 4 categories. So I've got to say, I didn't even realize he was playing, but he plays every week on tour. So I guess it shouldn't have been that surprising to see him in the field. You can tell I'm not playing him this week. I have no exposure to Eric Cole. He's definitely under the radar, that's for sure. If I didn't even remember he was playing. Dude, I remember everyone playing, by the way. I've got just a sicko memory when it comes to that shit. That's how you know he's under the radar. Derek says, you want to build a GPP lineup with Scotty and 5 7K guys. Is that possible? Yes, it is. And I think it'll be a pretty popular way to build with Scotty. Either that, and then maybe 1 8K guy, 1 6K guy will also be a super popular build, but definitely possible. Yeah. You bet Clark at plus 7,000. I honestly think it's a good bet. I'm with that. I didn't bet him myself, but I thought about it. He went on my Monday show. I actually bet, I'll just say it. I bet Wyndham Clark at 60 to 1 on Monday, and I refunded the bet, Timothy, so I could go out there and bet Luke Clanton. So I'm glad that you have the outright in case he ends up winning and I refunded it, because that would be tilting as hell. What's going on, Philly? Love the prop picks for tomorrow. Yep, we're going to talk some props here in a few minutes, actually. He played well in the desert out there. He did. And like I said, he's from Scottsdale, so I think there's something to that. Clanton or Clark, if I had to choose, I went Clanton. I bet Luke Clanton too. So that's where I'm siding, but I like both of them. Your content from the players in course breakdown, you like it. Oh, I appreciate that. The projection worksheet has been very helpful. You've been locked out of your Patreon. Can I look into this? Yes, I will, Matt. I'll do it after we get off live stream, though. Can't do it while we're on here now. Philly says, Scotty and Decky got to be lower owned combo. Yeah, if you're going to go with both of those guys together, Philly, I don't want to say it's going to be low owned, but it will be a little bit lower owned than if you took them by themselves. Like a Scotty Scheffler and then let's say a Tom Kim combination. I know the ownership's like pretty much the same, right? It's like 16% as opposed to 15% on Tom Kim. Actually, Tom Kim's a little bit lower owned than what you have here at Hideki, but the combination of Scotty Scheffler and Tom Kim is going to be a higher owned combination than what you have there with Scotty and Hideki, just because of the salary aspect. So yeah, you're right there. That's probably going to be a thing. A lot of talk around Billy Ho. I agree. That's why his ownership's a little bit higher than you would probably expect. And is Gary Woodland chalky this week? You like him too? Not super chalky. I've got him getting a little bit more ownership than some of the guys around him. I'm former winner at this golf course, so I like what you're doing there, but I wouldn't call him mega chalk. You are sure Scotty and Straka will be popular too? Oh, for sure. Yeah, you can actually see them on there. Scotty's 44%. And yes, Straka, I wouldn't call him mega chalky. I was actually kind of surprised to see him there at 13.6%, but more popular than your average cat, that's for sure. Let's bring up Draftkings. We're going to build one lineup together and then talk through props. If you have any specific questions about players, feel free to go ahead and throw those down into chat. because if not, we're going to go through this rather quickly over here on DraftKings. Smash the like button, by the way, if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. It'll, of course, include our showdown and prop previews throughout the weekend. But over here on DraftKings, when we're building a lineup for this week, just like the case for most main slates, our main concern is ownership. And just for making this a little bit like more interesting when it comes to the lineup construction, we're going to throw in a Scotty Scheffler, right? So we're going to use the 40-50% owned chalk just to show you how you navigate that. And another thing to notice is that it puts you down to 7,600 remaining per player, but it's not as big an impact as you might think going and putting in a $12,000 player. Because if you go down here and you use a McCarty, let's say it's $6,600, let's say that you find another 6K guy that you really like maybe a Frankie Sapin there at $6,800. Now you're up to $8,200 for your last three spots, which is where you started your lineup, right? Just below the average salary that you start a lineup with. So sure, it kind of forces your hand with like 1-2 plays, but when you have the 6K range, as loaded as it is, like just for Svensson, he was in for the Matt Kuchar withdrawal. That's how Svensson got into the field. Like you could play him at super low ownership. A Matty Schmidt, a Lawrence, a Hoey. We mentioned him as a potential play. There are enough guys to open up that salary that it's not that big of a deal taking a 12K player. Now, the bigger deal is the ownership, but now we've got two guys that are offsetting that salary that are also getting us that differentiation, right? Sub 5% on both of these players. So, like I said, it's not that big a deal. Like if you use Scotty Scheffler, it forces you to take a differentiated play. Now, the thing that you want to avoid doing is taking a Scotty Scheffler and then using the chalk of all chalk down low. And I guess just let me bring up my projections real quick to kind of point out some of the chalk in the 6 and 7K range. So just bear with me here 1 second. Like there's some guys at the bottom end of the 7K range, like Charlie Hoffman, I'm still playing, right, at 8.9%. But if you're going to use a guy down there at 8.9%, he can't be the guy that you're getting different with. Ali Hodges, for example, I have over 6%. At Gary Woodlands, I knew somebody asked about his ownership. He's a little bit over 6%. Lucas Glover is extremely popular. I've got him at nearly 12% ownership. Andrew Novak at just over 10% ownership over there in that 7K range. If you're going to use those kind of players, or if you want to use those kind of players, it's really tough if you're using a Scotty Scheffler up top. So I'm not fading every single guy that I just pointed out. There are a couple of them that are sneaking into my lineups. But if I'm using one of those guys in that 7K range and Scotty Scheffler's in my lineup, then I'm going to have to really force my hand somewhere else. So that's where having a product ownership cap really comes into hand when you're going through your optimizer. And when you're going out there and building lineups by hand, you kind of have to be thinking about these things when you're clicking in players. Because, for example, if rather than using a Sapin, I was like, I really want to use a Glover. Let's say for whatever reason, you think he wins this week or something like that, and you want to throw him in there instead. Well, now for our last three spots, yeah, we only have $8,000 remaining. I guess it's not the biggest deal for our last three spots, but now we really have to force our hand with our ownership because we've got the chalk up top, a chalky Lucas Glover, and with the 8K remaining, we're probably taking someone here in this 8K range with some ownership too. Like, let's say that that's a Kitayama. Like, Kitayama is one of your 8K plays that you want to go out there and build around. But he's like 15% owned. So now we only have 2 spots remaining. We really only have 1 pivot in this lineup so far. And because we have a Scotty Scheffler in this lineup, your last 2 spots should probably be both pivots. Like, I know sometimes I'll say like, 2 pivots in a large field GPP lineup is okay in some cases. Not so much when you have a 50% owned guy in your lineup, and then also other pieces of chalk down there in that 7K range. So for example, if you were in this kind of situation, the top end of the 7K range, you've got to avoid some of the more popular players. So for example, like a Minwoo, you guys know I really like him this week. A Harry Hall, a Fowler, a Horschel. A lot of people really like at this event. You probably can't use any of them if you're trying to make sure that you're not duplicated with this kind of lineup, especially in the large field GPP. So you're like kind of forced to go to guys like a Hostler, who is a lower tier player than some of those other guys around him. And then with your last minute, you're forced with that same kind of decision. If you're going to try and make sure you're not duplicating yourself, you've got to get off of some of those more popular players. So even though I like a Charlie Hoffman, I bet him outright this week at 110-1. I probably can't finish my lineup with that sort of player with the chalk that we've taken. So that's why rather than taking a Glover, we go down here and we play a Sapin. That's a lot lower owned. So with our last man in here, we have a little bit more leeway to perhaps go there and play a Minwoo Lee. at $7,900. So that's kind of the idea when it comes to your lineup construction. You always need to be balancing the ownership when it comes through it. A lot of that was for the large field GPPs. So like the big $5, big $25 this week. That's the kind of thought process that I'm going through. But even in single entries, maybe you can be a little bit more lackadaisical about the ownership, but you don't want to be completely nonchalant about it. You still have to be thinking about leverage, trying to make sure that you can move up those GPPs when you end up going out there and finding a good play. So that's what I'll say about the lineup construction this week. It's not rocket science. It's not the kind of week where I'm going out there and stacking one wave versus the other, but it is the kind of week that because I'm playing a 50% owned Scotty Scheffler in a lot of my lineups, which by the way, I will say this too, I'm not locking him. He's not in every lineup that I'm playing. So I know some people that are using him might be locking him on a week like this, but the more interesting builds are going to be Scotty Scheffler. Because if you're fading Scotty up top, you know, it's not like you can completely ignore ownership at the other, 4 or 5 spots, but you're going to have a lot more leeway. So for example, if you faded Scotty Scheffler up top and you wanted to play Lucas Glover, you can probably squeeze that, right? If you're not playing Scotty up top, but it's when you play Scotty plus a few other chalky players that it starts to become a little bit of a problem in those large field GPPs. Im looks low owned. He is a little bit low owned, that's for sure. Golf is back for the casuals. Looking forward to this week. I agree with that. Yep, with football over, a lot of those people are coming back. Thoughts on Keith Mitchell this week? I want him to be my low owned little flyer play. So I don't want to say too much about him, Chris, but I'm playing him this week. So that probably gives you enough information right there, right? What do I think about that Paul Waring guy? So I actually just mentioned him, Phil, down there towards the bottom. He's the guy who won on the DP World Tour. So if you want to check out my full thoughts on that, Phil, you might have to go a little bit further into the live stream for that. Hoffman should be 250 to 1 to win. Yeah, I don't know about that, dude. He started at 100 to 1 to win on those books, and he got bet down to like 80 or 90 to 1. So I guess you're entitled to your opinion, dude. But his form lately has been a lot better than you know. And the reason I can say like there's no chance that you actually like know the stats that you're talking about, because let's look at Charlie Hoffman, by the way, just because I'll stand on business with this too. Charlie Hoffman lately has been playing better than just about every other player in this field when it comes to his tee to green play. Over his last 12 rounds, look at this, 0.9 strokes off the tee, 0.7 strokes on approach. So respectfully, you're full of shit. Respectfully, I don't really give a fuck what you have to say because I don't think you know what you're talking about. And I say that as respectfully as possible, right? You're in a YouTube chat watching a show. I don't really know if we need to take you seriously. Going with 80% Scotty and less than 50 lineups, I guess that makes sense. Can that Valikri guy go low? I don't know who Valikri is, if I'm going to be honest. And trust me, I'm not getting defensive. I could give a fuck what you think. I'm just saying it for what it is, dude. Like, you're like, oh, you should be 250 to 1 to win. Then don't use them. No one gives a fuck, dude. Like, seriously. And Valimaki, I'm assuming that's what you mean. Sammy? Let's see. Is he in the field? So, yeah, I think this is who you're talking about. Sammy's not really the kind of guy you see go low all that often. He's more of a grinder. At least that's what I've noticed about Valimaki over the years. If you take a look at his recent starts, he played about the Farmers, which is more of like a harder event. Obviously, Torrey Pines, one of the harder courses that we have out here. Amgen Irish Open, that is a very difficult course over there on the DP World Tour. The Czech Masters, that was actually an easier event, would say, where he went out there and finished T12. I know we're only looking at like the last few months over there for Valimaki, but that's usually what you see with his stat profile. Is he's the kind of guy that, where was it when he first came on tour? It wasn't at the Farmers the first year. When he was first brand new on tour, he might have been the Genesis that he went out there and had a really good week, but it was a really difficult course. So he went out there and showed up. So that's my intuition there. Vegas, another top 10 this week for a long shot. Yeah, it is a long shot. That's for sure. But yeah, I was going to try and think of something nice to say about Vegas, but I don't know. I like the guy to death. He's very much involved with the hospital that my mom runs down here in South Florida. So I always have a bad time saying anything bad about him, but there's a reason why he's at the bottom end of the 6K range, but he's a really good dude. So if you want to play him and you want to support him for that, I am all for that. I'll say that much. Yeah, Valimaki, he's got the fro like I do. What are his stats, by the way, Camilo? So I'll go through them for you. Yeah, he's way down at the bottom. He's gaining on approach. Here, I'll show you. Let me actually share it for you so you can see. Gaining on approach, and then he's like losing everywhere else. So honestly, compared to the guys around him, I mean, look at this. He's hitting the ball best with his irons of everyone down here. I mean, you got to go the whole way up to David Lipsky before anyone's really gaining anything on approach. I guess Kevin Streelman, right? You can see he's gaining on approach there. I don't know. I'm not playing him, but I don't think you're crazy for thinking about that whatsoever. Guy should be in the NFL. Yeah, he should be, dude. Look at him. Bro, he's got some meat on him, that's for sure. Yeah, he played well at Torrey, that's for sure. And yeah, absolutely. It's not, I don't know him personally, Derek. It's my family that's closer with him, especially my mom. That's a lot closer with Camilo. But in my room back in my parents' house, so I don't live there anymore, obviously, I've got this massive ass Camilo Villegas thing under my bed that I still haven't brought over to my apartment. It has a driver of his in it. It has 2 pairs of his shoes encased in it, and then some massive ass picture that's signed by him in the background. So a really cool piece of merch that I actually want to put up behind me at some point, but it's just too big. Like, you guys can see those pictures way up there at the top. They're pretty big. That's some big ass wall back there, by the way, that we have in the back. It's bigger than both of those. So we like the guy. I have some merch for him, but I don't know. Chris Ventura keeps it rolling this week. I think that's a sharp take. What I got to say about Ventura, we mentioned him when he was first out here a few weeks ago. He's a very high pedigree player. And what I mean by that is that we've heard about Ventura since he was a teenager. And those kind of players, like a Pendrith, we heard about since he was a teenager. There's a reason why. It's because they're very physically talented. When it comes to golf, Ventura is a very tall dude. He hits the ball a long way, and he's got a gift when it comes to his putting. He's a very, very talented player around the green. That being said, he's very raw. We don't know very much about Chris Ventura, but I think it's a sharp take saying that kind of thing. Did I go golfing today? I look like I'm dressed for it. Yeah, I did. The shirt is very much so wrinkled and sweaty and all that kind of shit. Yeah, I golfed today. So if you saw my tweet, I was out there earlier. Thoughts on Ballister as a budget enabler? So yeah, that's the amateur, right? The young kid that they have out here. So I personally don't know anything about the kid. So here he is. He's here at $6,300. Sorry, I'm on the wrong tab. Actually, I can't bring that up. My bad. It has my player pool on it, so I'm not going to bring it up. But yeah, he's $6,300 this week. From what I've heard and what you can tell on his like college standings, he's one of the best college players that you have out there. So he's not quite a Luke Clanton when it comes to like the finishes, the top 5, top 10s over there on the NCAA circuit, but he's pretty damn good. And what we've seen from a lot of these college kids is that they're ready to go right away. So I'm not against it, man. Like I don't know if I'm going to be that bold about it, but I'm thinking about it. You're in on Cam Young. He got you no ownership. Yeah, he is definitely not getting some ownership. Yo, by the way, Billy Ho, I am banning you and sending you to the Shadow Realm. No one gives a fuck about the players you playing not getting talked about. And again, I just want to make that super clear, dude. No one gives a fuck. See ya. We don't need you around here. Trust me. What's going on? Dumb, Dumber, and Dumb. Look at this. Nice name, but what's going on, dude? By the way, that movie, Dumb and Dumber, it's great. Did I go low today? Absolutely not. Nope. I ended up shooting like +7 on my front nine. I didn't take score on the back. So definitely did not go low, and I had 0 birdies today. And then, yeah, he's the reigning U.S. Amateur. That's all you need to know. High pedigree sort of player. He won the U.S. Amateur? Are we sure about that? I know he's a high pedigree guy. I didn't think he won the U.S. Amateur, but let's check it. If he did, he's even better than I thought. He won the European Amateur. Big difference. Big difference. But still, very, very impressive. He won the European Amateur. Oh, and he did win the U.S. Amateur. Look at that. I got ahead of myself. I didn't finish reading the sentence. It'd go really far, right? If I could just read the damn sentence in front of me. That's impressive as hell. I knew he was a good college golfer, but this is even more impressive than what I thought. Yeah, I'm not playing him, but I got to say, now I kind of wish I was, because these U.S. Amateur champions, I mean, Nick Dunlop, player that was in that kind of conversation, guys like Sahith Theegala, Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, I mean, all your world's best players have gone that done as well. Not to say, I mean, if we look at the list of champions, it's not like every single one of these is an absolute stud. Like Sam Bennett, he really hasn't done anything yet. Same thing with James P.O. Like he went to live and now he's absolute shit. But Victor Hovland, former champion of the U.S. Amateur. Bryson DeChambeau, former winner. Matt Fitzpatrick, you all know about that, right? He won at Brookline. Then went out there and ended up winning the major championship there later. Benny Ann, like it's a good sign, right? Like we have some guys here, like who the hell is Tyler Strafacci? I genuinely don't even know who that is. Andy Ogletree is absolute horseshit. Like he's on live and he's one of the worst players that you have over there. But there are enough really good players on this list that, yeah, I think that's sharp. I like what you're doing there. Damn, you had me on my DFS. Yeah, dude, you would have had negative points today. Monday qualifier McGreevy. Chris Ventura, putt detective. I see what you did there, Zach. I like that. Yeah, he's a damn good putter, that's for sure. And then Kelly Kraft. Let me bring up my sheet real quick. Where the hell is Kelly this week? That's a name I haven't seen in a while, by the way. Kelly Kraft. Why won't it share my screen? Come on. You don't got to be this annoying. All right. What is the price on this guy? He's in the field, I'm guessing, if you brought it up. Oh, don't look at those lineups. Nope. You're not allowed to enter those. You guys aren't allowed to dupe me, okay? You guys aren't allowed to take those lineups. Oh, he's not in the field. You had me thinking that Kelly Kraft is in the field. I wish he was. That's another name, right, that we haven't seen for a while. All right, let's go through some prop stuff. I forgot that we're going to do that. Is that Yang the one that won a major back in the day? You mean for the U.S. Amateur list, right? Let me look. I don't think so. No, I think it's no Gun Yang. No. That's someone else. Yeah, no, for sure. Y.E. Yang's the one you're thinking about. Whose shoe is back there? So I'll show you right now. Give me a second. It is a signed shoe. So this is signed by the people at the Fedex St. Jude 4 years ago. And you can tell it was from a long time ago because it has Abraham Answer on it. So that's Abraham Answer right there that you guys can see. The front one, you can probably read that, I'd guess. That's Justin Thomas. This one is Cam Smith. And then, yeah, I think that's it. So Justin Thomas, Abraham Answer, and Cam Smith ended up signing that one. So it's and that was the week that I forget who won that week, but one of those guys was in contention and almost ended up winning, which would have been pretty cool. Read the last two messages. He was the amateur list there, non-the-field. Gotcha. Ying Yang. Yeah, Cam Smith's my guy too. I love it. All right, let's talk through some prop stuff, guys. Went through enough over here on the DFS side and whatnot. If you guys still have any DFS questions, I will go over those. Let me bring up Prize Picks real quick so we can go through the props I like. And which, by the way, I am banning underdog. We're not playing an underdog for the foreseeable future. Which we'll leave that to one of the prop live streams to give you guys the details on why. Let's go through a few props that I like. So here are the averages from last year. Now, I think the scoring average is going to be pretty similar. Like, I think the birdie bogey averages, I don't think they're going to change very much, but I think that the fairway and green averages might go down ever so slightly. Excuse me. The reason I say that is it's super firm this year, at least from what I've heard for the people that are actually at the event, is that the greens have some bounce to them. And last year, because of the rain they got the week before the event, there wasn't as much bounce to the greens. So your average might go down to like 12.25 per round, maybe like 12.5. I don't think it's going to be terrible, though, for round one because we have next to no wind out there. I mean, it's going to be perfect conditions, especially when it heats up around 10 a.m. local time. So what I'm thinking over there in my process is these overs on fairways and overs on greens make a lot of sense, especially if we can find an elite tier player. And if you guys saw my blog that I did over there on the Bet the Number model, you guys will see some of the props that I've already used. So one's an over on this JJ Spawn on greens, and the other one I played was an over on Akshay Bhatia fairways. JJ Spawn last year was a top 20 green regulation percentage player on all the PGA Tour. And Akshay Bhatia was a top 35 driving percentage player. So with the averages last year at 8.29 per round, I mean, even if it goes down to 8 per round with the firmer conditions, that means that Akshay can have an average day when it comes to his driving accuracy, and he'd hit us for the over there at 7.5. Now, another reason to really like Akshay is that in terms of his driving accuracy, he's gained accuracy to the field in 7 of his last 9 rounds. So he has a lot of really good form heading in. He's just an accurate guy to begin with. Love that over there for tomorrow. He is a PM wave tee time, but doesn't really impact the fairway average all that much. And then the over on JJ Spawn here, he was, as you said, elite tier when it came to his green regulation percentage last year. And over his last 24 measured rounds, he's getting over 0.8 strokes approach per round. So you're talking about one of the best iron players over the last few months, and a player that last year was a top 5 player in this field when it came to hitting green. So he's got the AM tee time as opposed to the PM tee time over there on Akshay. To these times to the right, by the way, are incorrect. You want to use the times that you see under the player on their actual projection as the real time. And because he has the AM tee time, he's going to have receptive greens. He's going to have next to no wind, just like the PM wave players. That was a slip I went over there and ended up playing. Now, that's not the only slip that I ended up taking for round number 1. Just like my projections, just like the player poll that I showed you guys before, you can also find all the slips that I'm taking over there on my Patreon page. But I really like these fairways and green lines, and I'm probably going to add even more exposure before lock because, I mean, they have some guys here like Akshay, who's a really accurate driver, below last year's average. Like they just have this board mispriced. Like when you take a look at the fact that Wyndham's here at 7.5 and then Akshay's at 7.5, one of them has to be wrong. Like Wyndham Clark was one of the most inaccurate players on the PGA Tour. How the hell is he at 7.5? When Akshay, who's an extremely accurate player, is at that same exact number? Like something has to be incorrect, right? Even if Akshay is at the right number, that means that Wyndham is probably 1 to 2 fairways too high. And you can say the same thing about a few other players on this board, and the same thing over here in green regulation percentage. So especially when underdog, right, they only have birdies and strokes. Over here in the prize pick side, that's why I like to focus on those 2 categories. Now, with the strokes lines, I thought there were guys at 69 that made a whole lot of sense for unders, but a lot of the guys that have already played got bumped over there for this category. So that's why I wanted to give you guys these 2 over there for that slip. And it's also the one that I already gave out for free over there on the bet the number model. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. Patreon page is where you can find all the rest of the exposure this week. Let me see if there's any specific prop questions, but for round number 1, I think it's a good time to, like I said, focus on the fairways, green boards. I think have a lot of value on them. And then especially when it comes to like birdies, maybe take a wait and see approach, because last year the birdie average went down a little bit, which was a little bit weird, even though they had the softer greens. So I kind of want to take a wait and see approach and see what happens before I enter any birdie lines myself. Strokes lines felt a little bit safer. Like even if it goes from like a 3.7 to a 4 birdie average, or from like a 3.7 to a 3.5 birdie average, you know, the stroke average is still likely going to be under par. And just to show you guys that, last year, round 1 was by far the hardest round that you had. It's when the weather came through and really gave a little bit of a weather edge last year. Even on the hardest day last year, it still played under par. So you're talking about like maybe a stroke difference at the very most, and that would be the biggest example that you could find of a discrepancy. I think it's going to play half a stroke to a stroke under par, and I feel pretty confident about that. Let's see. Yeah, fuck underdog. That's for damn sure. And then Denny or Mitchell, if I had to choose one, I'd probably go Denny myself just because of the shots gained metrics. Mitchell, maybe a little bit more of a high upside player that you guys could get to. But that's all I've got out here for the live stream. I've got to get a shower. I've got to get cleaned up after being out of the house and golfing all day. But hopefully we're able to get all those questions answered for you guys down there in chat. And you feel a little bit more prepared for all of your exposure this week. Don't forget about checking the weather tomorrow morning. Make sure you guys don't have crazy winds over there on this HRRR. And best of luck, whether you're over here on DFS or over here on these prop sites. If you guys take all the money home over there from those prop sites like Underdog and Prize Picks, especially Underdog. Not to say that you guys can't play there, right? Play there, take all their money. I would love to hear that from you guys out there. But best of luck with whatever pieces of exposure that you're getting to. And to see you guys for the showdown streams out there throughout the weekend.